What's going on, everybody? Episode 37. Getting awfully close to that presuppositional video release. Pressure's on. But we're going to have that out pretty soon. If you're new to the show, you know that that's an ongoing little, not really a joke, it's very serious actually, but a little thing that we got going on that kind of puts the fire under our asses to get some videos done. Today we're going to be going and discussing quite a variety of things, I would say. Cecil, I would pass that to you to kind of explain what's going on and segue into a few things that I know you want to talk about at the beginning. But yeah, go ahead and let the audience know what we're doing tonight, and then they haven't seen episodes with David in the past, where they can find that and whatnot, and we'll move on into the videos after that.
Yeah, so we're gonna discuss a number of different things: causality, some other both scientific and philosophical concepts. Having my favorite guest back on, David, my brother.
My favorite host.
I also
right here. Come on, guys. No,
I also I said S, plural.
Okay, cool.
I also wanted to just briefly go over a conversation that David and I had on the EA show a few days ago with unfortunately I don't remember their names, but it was a panel of I think 3 different Muslims where we talked about the Kalam argument, and we didn't really get very far. We didn't really even get past the first premise there. But I wanted to sort of ask David what his thoughts were about that conversation, because from my perspective, it felt like, again, this is not an attack on anybody, like it's not a personal thing against anyone, but it just felt like, you had 3 non-scientists try to lecture a physicist on causality, and it kind of bothered me a little bit. I felt like we didn't really get a chance to get much of a word in, which I know, it's hard when you have a panel of a lot of people. It's hard to sort of balance that. It's nobody's fault, but I just felt like we didn't really get to tackle the arguments too well. And from my perspective, it seemed like they were trying to sort of shift the meaning of the terms from causality to explanation, and then try to pretend like we'd agreed with the premises. I don't know, David, I wanted to know what you thought about that conversation and how it played out, and whether or not you felt like...
I actually kind of enjoyed the give and take. I think that, as we will try to illustrate tonight with these videos, our common sense intuition is so strong that the ideas that come from our common sense intuition are really hard to. They oftentimes get in the way, and they're very hard to get around. And I think that's the kind of thing that you saw there. And it's also the kind of thing that a lot of people in science, sort of dealing with the hardest problems, think might be stalling progress.
Right.
Because I mentioned this during the show, that we think in terms of cause and effect, even when we do the most non-intuitive aspects of physics. It's just maybe it's impossible. I shouldn't say that, but it's very hard to get around those intuitions. And I mean, the fact that, the lesson, I think, of modern science is that we don't want to rely on intuition if we want to get at reality deeply. And so it's a little surprising that, given that lesson, right, if you take science to heart, you value science, and you absorb that lesson, it's a little strange to attempt to anchor that kind of exploration in something that basically circumvents all of modern science and goes back 1,000 years to ideas written down by one person sitting in a chair using logic.
Yeah, so that's kind of thing too. Like, obviously, I do philosophy and I love philosophy. I think it's incredibly valuable.
Were you hearing me okay? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I can hear you fine. But the idea that we can talk about, causality as a philosophical concept and remove that from the science, and think that we can get a reality purely through philosophy, I think is a mistake. And I do philosophy. I think the two need to work together. And I don't know. I just
agree with that. I was recently having a conversation with a philosopher on, what is philosophy about? And the message that got across is that philosophy is basically about asking the right questions.
Right. Yeah. No, I agree with that. But yeah, anyway, I just wanted to address that, and hopefully, maybe they can, we can have a part 2 to that conversation.
I think my bottom line is, you can try to modify statements, logical reasoning, meta assumptions, but you're ultimately not going to get at reality deeply. That's not going to happen.
I mean, the one thing that I really had an issue with is this idea that we're presupposing, that we need to presuppose certain axioms to do science in the first place. Like, even if that was true, the difference is that we have a methodology that can verify why certain assumptions work and others don't. But I'm not even willing to give them that ammo, because I don't think that I'm actually presupposing anything. I'm not
sure why it really matters. You can imagine scientific ideas that are all full of presuppositions, and scientific ideas that are, barren of these kinds of things, and something in between. But what does it matter? If, at the end of the day, what counts is the explanatory power and the predictive power of those ideas. And that's how you measure the success of a scientific idea. I think that message kind of gets ignored. People worry about all sorts of details. None of that matters when you can go and check whether there's some validity to the things that you're putting together.
But I think
the falsification criterion doesn't exist for like it's like, seems like someone's gonna say that. It's like, it wouldn't matter if I had to pull myself up in the bootstraps to get some kind of the conjecture or hypothesis working. To me, that seems to be what it entails, is to make the assumption and then test that, and then the falsification idea behind that would be to do, to challenge those kind of assuums. Or
that's right. No, I agree with that. By the way, not everybody agrees with that in science, and a lot of people want to get rid of falsification.
That to me
that's kind of an amazing thing.
That sounds crazy.
That's pseudoscience from my perspective, but
yeah. But no, I would just add that it's how would I say this? It's this idea. For some reason, theists have this extremely binary thinking, and I think I've addressed this before on the show, where it's either all ideas are just as valid, and knowledge can come through all kinds of completely contradictory methodologies, or we can't know anything. We can't even talk about the external world. Like, to them, the assumption of the external world is on equal footing to that of their God. I mean, I had a discussion with somebody on Discord.
Some people, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, obviously not everybody, but overwhelmingly, I get this pushback. I recently had a discussion with someone who was incapable of noticing the difference between the types of claims that we make. Like, I don't need to verify that I ate a bowl of cereal the same way that I would need to verify that I'm talking with an Egyptian god. Like, there are different kinds of claims.
Would it be easier that people who think like that are more willing to challenge you and come on your show, as opposed to people who don't share those
I don't know. I mean, I asked the amount of people who say these kind of things online, and then kind of, I think most of them refuse to go on, because I think ultimately, it can be an anxiety-inducing thing to be, live in front of, who knows how many people. So, and I can understand this to a degree. But it's those kind of statements that are mind-boggling to me, like just no ability to recognize the difference in the type of claims we make and the kind of verification that we expect for those claims. But anyway, I just want to get that out of the way because it was on my mind.
I think it leads in pretty well into kind of what we're going to be diving into anyway. Right. So maybe David, I guess before we continue, we do have actually a lot of new viewers in a shorter period of time than we did since the last time you've been on. So maybe you give a brief rundown of kind of your background again. I know we've asked you probably like 4 times now, but
okay.
But just kind of for new viewers and things like that, and then maybe lead that into to the videos we're presenting today. And before we get into that,
yeah. So I'm a physics professor. I study black holes, and as a result of the host of the show, I keep getting pulled into the show to have these conversations, which I enjoy. And my goal is to try to bring science to more people as much as possible. And so that's what I do. That's why I do it. And I think physics in particular is pretty amazing, and it tells us some spectacularly counterintuitive things that I think it's a pity that so few people know about these strange aspects of science. Things like relativity have been around for over 100 years, and yet most of relativity is sort of hidden behind some veil. People know the wrong things about quantum physics. So, I would like to get these ideas across, and the reality is that's a much stranger world than we can possibly imagine.
Yeah, and so we'll kind of get a breakdown on that here. This first video that we're gonna do, I think I'd say all of them except for one of them is narrated by Sean Carroll, which if you're not familiar with, familiarize yourself quickly. Let me get that pulled up on the screen. We should be good here. And yeah, if at any time you guys want to pause it or make a comment, or if we would just go through the full video and we can kind of have a dialogue, then just kind of raise your hand or speak up and I'll pause it.
The basic laws of physics, things like F equals ma, gravity is inversely proportional to the distance squared, Schrodinger's equation, and so on, don't say anything about the direction of time. Sure, they relate what's going on now to what happens next and to what happened previously, but there's no distinction between forwards and backwards in time. The past and future are on an equal footing as far as the microscopic laws of physics are concerned. In the macroscopic world, however, there is one rule that does have time going in one direction only, the second law of thermodynamics. That says that any isolated system will tend towards increasing entropy or disorder, like how cold milk and hot coffee mix together into lukewarm coffee milk that will never.
Oh, Mike, you're muted.
Of course. I want to get a poll in the audience or a poll from UCs. How many times you've had the second law of thermodynamics kind of pushed towards your way in theistic arguments? Maybe we should
almost
think about that real fast.
And I'm not exaggerating, almost on a daily basis. People try to use the law, the second law, to say why the Big Bang couldn't have happened, and how like this proves God or whatever. Like, it's just completely draining.
Yeah, evolution's not possible due to the second law. All these types of things I always hear. But yeah,
I mean, people who just don't understand what you're talking about.
Yeah,
Are unmixed from each other. Once a system gets to its fully disordered state, its equilibrium, there's no more direction of increasing entropy to determine the arrow of time. So the fact that we experience the flow of time right now means that we're not in equilibrium. There are basically two ways that could happen. Either the universe just happens to be right now in this particular low entropy configuration, with two directions of time flowing out forward and backward from now, with increasing entropy in both directions. Or, at some point in the far distant past, the universe started with even lower entropy, and disorder has been increasing ever since.
Okay, so poll in the audience for option 1 or option 2, right? What do you think? David, I think the clear option here is option 2, right? What would you, do you have anything you kind of want to state?
I should mention why it is that option 1 is a possibility. Why are people considering it, and why option 2 can't be the whole story, or is unlikely to be the whole story.
Yeah, that'd be interesting.
So option 1 is this entropy where you have a symmetric curve, right? The entropy as a function of time. And this is not a symmetric curve. And that's a problem because the laws of physics don't prefer a direction of time. So why would the entropy only increase in one direction of time? It should increase in both directions of time, and that's what that other curve is showing.
Sure.
Okay, but you can sort of think of that other curve as not being viable because the entropy isn't low enough. The lowest entropy on that curve isn't low enough. We know that by just looking out, open our doors and look out into the world, and we don't see a high entropy universe. We see structure as far as the eye can see, as far as telescopes can see. Right? In fact, we have a pretty good sense that structure goes all the way back to the Big Bang. And so it's an amazingly low entropy universe. And so in a sense, you can kind of get that curve, this curve from that one.
Okay.
And so where's the other part of that curve? It's before the Big Bang.
Wait, just real quick, could you define entropy again?
You want the actual definition of entropy is a mathematical quantity. It's some constant times the logarithm of the number of ways in which a configuration of stuff looks exactly the same.
Gotcha.
Yeah, it's like you wouldn't make what I guess you would say in philosophy an analytic kind of statement to say that disorder equates to entropy or entropy equates to disorder in that sense, or you would go a more stricter kind of definition.
Yeah, it's not the disorder idea that really gives us a sense of why we have these explanations based on entropy. It's just the number of states that look the same to us. That number is enormous compared to. We can get into this maybe in further examples, but this explains, when you drop the glass and the glass shatters. You want to answer the question, why doesn't the glass hit the ground and then come back up to your hand perfectly intact? And the answer is it's just unlikely to do that because there are so many ways for you to end up in that state in which the glass is all over the place, the fluid was is all over the place, and there's no comparison in terms of numbers between. So the system is going to evolve into one of the possible states that are compatible. Probabilistic, yes, exactly.
probabilistically more likely to be
That's right. So you can
any various combination of disorder versus this
versus order,
lower
states that are
entropy.
ordered, right? Versus lower entropy states. So coming back up to your hand, that's there are very few configurations of matter that allow for that, and so it's just a likelihood statement. And so, in fact, the second law isn't really a law in that sense.
Okay.
It's the likely behavior of physical systems.
Oh, and shout out to James is tired and God of Hangovers, Adam, everybody else that's joined, Tobin, Autumn. I can never say your name, Witterschniz, but I know you have become a regular, and so thank you for joining us as well.
Yeah, thank you.
And Mama, I saw Mama on there as well.
Spoiler alert, it's option number 2. That low entropy configuration was the Big Bang. 13.8 billion years ago, the universe was hot, dense, smooth, and rapidly expanding. A smooth, dense plasma...
Sorry to pause it again, but David, you did say something about like that curve could kind of come from before that. Could you elucidate on that, or did you, or is that kind of the gist of that already?
Given what we understand about the laws of nature, laws of physics, and the content of the universe, just stuff in the universe, what are the arrangements, the most likely arrangements?
So it just goes back to you're just going back to that
what's the probability given the laws?
Okay,
and the most likely states are the states where you don't see all the structure.
Yeah. Okay. Then I understand what you're saying. Awesome.
But particles might not seem organized in low entropy, but when the density of matter is extremely high, the gravitational force between particles is enormous. Smoothness in the face of such tendencies is not equilibrium, but is actually a very delicately balanced low entropy state. Things want to be gravitationally clumped together into concentrated configurations like protostars, proto-galaxies, or even black holes. What would a high entropy equilibrium universe look like? It would be empty space. And indeed, that's where we're headed. The universe is expanding and diluting, and eventually all of the stars will burn out and black holes will evaporate and we'll be left with nothing but emptiness in every direction. At that point, time's arrow will have disappeared, and nothing like life or consciousness will be possible. The fact that our sky is decorated with billions of stars and galaxies, and our biosphere is teeming with life, is a reflection of our low entropy beginnings. We don't know why the universe started in such an orderly initial state, but we should be glad it did. It gave us the non-equilibrium starting point that's necessary for the flow of time as we know it to exist. Everything that followed, from the formation of stars and galaxies to the origin of life, has been a story of increasing entropy. Time's arrow isn't a deep feature of the most fundamental laws of physics. It owes its existence to the specific initial conditions of our universe.
David, you said on a previous show about, I don't want to straw man what you had said, but something along the lines of like what the math tells us at t equals 0, right? Would any of that be kind of, is there any part of that kind of, I feel like is the theist atheist kind of?
So we follow the curve of entropy back, and it just keeps decreasing, and it's lowest at t equals 0. But the confusion there is that you want to insist that that's the beginning of time. It doesn't have to be. But it doesn't mean that there isn't something special going on. In fact, there is an enormous specialness there that needs to be explained, and this is one of the open questions. Why was the universe in such a low entropy state? Not everyone agrees that this is this is the way things are, but a lot of people think that's the basic question, and people are trying to address it. But that's different from saying that that's the beginning. So, but another cool thing to emerge from this, which is completely counterintuitive, is this idea that time, if you go back to the video, maybe we don't, that's difficult to do, but they show this curve of the entropy increasing. It's low initially, and then it increases, and it gets to the maximum value. When it gets to the maximum value, then this is a counterintuitive universe, because you want to ask yourself, how is time passing? You can imagine yourself being in this universe and looking around and saying, okay, I look over there and everything looks the same over there as it does over there, and everything is just spread out. There's no interesting structure, but that doesn't stop me from being able to look around and notice these things. But that's completely wrong, right? That's completely wrong, because it's for you to be able to do those kinds of things, you need to be able to do calculation, right? When I say I'm looking over there and noticing something, I'm calculating something. But those possibilities don't exist when the entropy has reached its highest possible value. That's a state where you can still increase the entropy, right? If you can do a calculation, you can still increase the entropy. So that isn't possible. And then you can ask, what's going on with time? Well, how do you measure time? You need some kind of a clock, and a clock is a thing that repeats itself in some way. It has some regularity, but there's nothing in a high entropy universe that can do that kind of thing. And so there's a real sense in which you could say it's not possible to measure time. Time doesn't exist anymore. It's a very strange idea, because it's completely counterintuitive to us. Right here we have space, expansion, stuff moving around in space, and then you end up at a point where there's no time. I can't really wrap my brain around that kind of idea. If it's true, right? And so there are some models, right? For example, Penrose, his idea is that it's something along these lines, that when things are so spread out in high entropy, there's no way that you can make a clock, and so there's time sort of disappears. The universe, I think he says, loses track of itself. And then strangely, right, if suddenly you have a fluctuation, right, and to understand these fluctuations, this is where you can sort of look at this universe in terms of these as a box with balls, red and blue balls, right, completely evenly distributed. That's a high entropy state. But if you keep shaking the ball, at some point you'll get some interesting structure. That means the entropy has jumped to a lower value, and now structures are possible. Time now is something that you can measure. So what does that mean? Does the time pop back into existence? Right? It's a very strange idea. It's just not something that we can, we insist that time is something that's there no matter what's going on in space, no matter what matter's doing. That doesn't seem to be the case.
Could this be more of an epistemic problem rather than an ontological one? Or is it suggesting that it's just ontologically?
Yeah, I don't know. Wait, when you say you can't measure time, what does that mean? Is that just a practical problem, or
right.
Is time now hidden somewhere that you just don't have any devices anymore for some reason that you can't measure it, and it's still there hidden? That's our intuition, right? But
right.
In physics, when you find that you can't find something, you can't measure it, no matter how, as an issue, maybe a principle, then maybe it just isn't there.
We were talking the other day about how, like, my concern is that if we get to a point where the conclusion seems illogical or irrational, that to me that's a problem. And your response was something along the lines of, and tell me if I'm remembering wrong here, but it just means that we're at a point where we can't make progress.
Well, where progress has stalled, because you're going to insist that this is a problem with our way of trying to find explanations, when in fact the lesson might be, right? We're not listening to the only lesson that the lesson that we're trying to advertise here is that our intuition is going to fail, and so maybe this is the place where your intuitions fail. Maybe you're not paying attention to the fact that you insist on certain notions of logic.
Right.
But do we really have the right to insist on those things?
I guess my concern ends up being that it's almost like this is giving theists ammunition to say things like, it takes more faith to be an atheist.
Yeah, but these are statements that are not anchored to the ideas that produce these statements.
Right.
The statements come from a specific place. When you say make a clock, then you think a little deeply about what that means, and you need matter. You need objects that have repeatability.
Right.
And so you can look and think deeply about exactly what the absence of that kind of object means. What does it imply? empirically, you can't find that kind of thing. Is this a statement about the deep down nature of reality, or is it a statement about time hiding itself in some way?
Right.
Yeah, for me, I kind of go to that. Like, I would agree with you. It's like, if it's going to go against it would go against your intuition to, I guess, I don't know if it's a great example, but maybe like wave particle duality, right? You're not going to just intuitively understand what that means, probably, or if there is any kind of notion to what our intuition is behind the implications. So it seems like what you're saying is like you kind of have to move on from that. But I always go to like back to before t=0. It's like the idea of creating or even intent or things like that involve this aspect of time, to where it seems to be just problematic to discuss in any venture of what that means. Because if it is quote unquote hidden or just non-existent in that way, I don't know how you can reference these things or even some metaphysical baggage to say that it can do these things without the requirement of what's necessary for it, right? Which would be time. Like if I say the word created, well, created implies that I have some use of time in order to do so, right? Like there has to be some causal series there.
Notice that we have a notion of time being created in a high entropy universe, right? We just imagine a scenario where we end up in a high entropy universe, and we said the notion of time disappears, and so it's possible that time itself disappears. There's no way to measure time, and that's because time itself has disappeared. But then a fluctuation, which is a completely straightforward kind of thing, it's the same thing that you get when you're just shaking balls in a box, right? Yeah. You suddenly end up in a situation where you have a little more structure, and that corresponds to having a notion of time. And so time emerges out of no time in a completely physical structure, given how we understand time is measured. In some sense, right?
Yeah. Of course. And so I think that would actually probably put us well on a segue for the next video of the arrow of time. Or did you guys want anything more to say before we hop into that one?
Oh, I'm good.
And maybe we can kind of follow up on things that are said there.
I think it's back off of the screen.
Yeah, it's off. I just didn't know if there'd be an ad or something. Cool, there's no ad. Let's add this to the stream.
It's perfectly obvious that time has a direction. All we mean by that is that the past is different from the future in lots of different ways. We were younger in the past. We will be older in the future. We remember the past. We don't remember the future. The surprise is that difference between past and future is nowhere to be found in the deep down laws of physics. Time is actually a lot like space. If you were out in a spacesuit flying around, there'd be no difference between up, down, left, right. Likewise, there's no intrinsic difference between the past and the future in the laws of physics. Now, that's not completely a mystery to us. We know that what actually happens in the real world is that you're not just made of one or two particles bumping into each other. You're a very, very complicated collection of many, many particles, and they're becoming more disorderly with time. This is to say that entropy increases. The interesting thing is that every difference between the past and the future can ultimately be traced to the fact that the entropy was lower in the past and is growing. That's the second law of thermodynamics. The universe was orderly, it's becoming more disorderly. And that's not a surprise. There are more ways to be disorderly than to be orderly. The surprise is that the universe was ever low entropy to begin with. If we go all the way back to the Big Bang, 13.7 billion years ago, the universe began in a highly ordered state. So modern cosmologists are trying to understand right now why the early universe was in a such precise state, why it was so low entropy. Once we understand that, it'll make perfect sense to us why the arrow of time stretches as it does from the past to today, all the way toward the future.
I like that bass.
Oh, I would say I like the music. It reminds me of when Steve from Blue's Clues would be like, all right, and we're going to draw a little shape. And then it'd be like, if you watch Blue's Clues, you know what I'm talking about.
No idea.
We never watched Blues. All right, we'll have to talk about that off air. So what made me the man I am today is some Blues Clues. All right. So yeah, Era of Time. We got that off the screen there. Yeah. So didn't you guys want to kind of chime in on that in regards to what we had just previously been saying?
Yeah. So I think there are some strange, non-intuitive things to point out. You guys have questions that you want to address before we do that?
I mean, I guess for me, it's just like what we were talking about earlier. It's so counterintuitive, where like, everything about my quality experience makes makes time feel like a real thing. Like the events of my life, like it's in the video. I remember the past. I don't remember the future. It just becomes an issue of is what we think in science just because we're limited in how we can understand reality, or is it the actual ontology of reality different than how we experience it and think it is? And if it's different, what does that mean? How do we process that? How do we wrap our heads around that? Can we even do that? And
So what? So first of all, do you? The first question would be, do you think the equations of physics are meaningful, and to what extent are they meaningful? To what extent are they saying something real about the world?
Right.
I think that's the kind of question, and you'll get all sorts of different answers. Some people say that they're just sort of more of use; they don't have a deep down meaning or something like that. It's philosophy of science here that we're talking about.
Right.
I think most physicists would agree that they're saying something directly about the world out there. Of course, then what do you do with things like quantum physics? How do you make sense of that? Well, maybe there are certain explanations that save our sense of logic that we've developed, but maybe there are others that are just not compatible with that, and we see that at the quantum level. In the last video that I proposed to you guys, we might talk about that. But here are some strange things to emerge from this. Right. So the idea is that the most likely configurations of matter and energy, stuff in the universe, is such that the entropy is very high. So I guess the classic example they use here is the making of an egg or the baking of a cake.
Yeah.
But you want to make a pizza, and you understand something about the laws of nature, and you can ask yourself, what is the easiest way to make a pizza? What's the most likely way to get a pizza in the universe that obeys the laws that we're familiar with? And the answer seems to be that you should just wait. The pizza should pop into existence. That's the easiest way, because other ways are much harder. And that's just the statement that, again, going back to the box universe with red and blue balls, right? You're in a high entropy state where there's no interesting structure. Same density of blue and red balls everywhere, and then you shake it around. At some point, these things have to move around, just obeying the laws, which is just momentum and then gravity pulling them down.
Yeah.
Eventually, you'll get some interesting structure, but you won't get all the red balls on one side and all the blue balls on one side. That's an extremely unlikely configuration, but you'll get some interesting structure. That little bit of structure represents the pizza, right? So again, the statement is, what's the easiest way to make a pizza? It's not the universe. It's not the way you imagine it. Your way of making a pizza, which is going to the supermarket, getting the ingredients, buying the oven, turning the oven on, and putting the dough in the oven, that's just the result of the fact that we live in a universe with an extremely low entropy condition in the deep past.
Mm-hmm.
But that's your intuition. That's the way it should be. That's an amazing fact, right? The fact that 30 years ago someone looked very different from the way they will look 30 years in the future, that's something that we take as completely straightforward. But it's hard to square with the laws of physics. You need this initial condition, the low entropy state in the deep past. That's the only thing that explains that to you.
And how does that relate in regards to maybe someone that posits some level of like complexity or something with those with those states? Is that kind of a
You have to have some complexity, right?
some part? Yeah.
For the pizza represents some complexity. We represent a high degree of complexity, but you would expect that if you have some complexity at some point, you would expect a little bit of complexity, because that's a much more likely state to be in than a state where there's an enormous amount of complexity.
Yeah, that makes
So
sense.
you would expect, right? These are these Boltzmann brains things that they talk about. That's little complexity. Right, so you would expect to find yourself in a universe where when you open your door and look outside, you don't see any complexity. You just see what's called thermal equilibrium, no interesting structure. But that's not the universe that you see. And that's surprising. That needs an explanation.
I do have one question, because I'm struggling with this idea, because you're talking about probability here.
Yeah.
But if the past, present, and the future all exist the way like you've described before, like chapters in a book,
Yes.
how does probability come in if everything that is and has taken place or is already there? What is it? I don't know what that means.
In the same way that you think of free will. In that sense, it's kind of like an emergent kind of thing, right? But you still have there's no problem having probability, right? You would expect a universe in which all the states that exist are mostly high entropy states, and then states where the entropy is not as high but not very low, some interesting structure, right? Those are all the states. So just count the states; they're just all out there.
So again, here you're talking about more like epistemology rather than what actually is there. You're talking about how we come to know, or what we should expect given what we see, rather than like you're not saying that the universe is ontologically probabilistic, right?
Okay, it's not that we. So everything can be perfectly deterministic, but we still have an issue of the low associated with the low entropy state. It's something that we have to explain, because
Right.
It's not that. I think we're using probability in there are different uses of the term.
Yeah.
And in this case, we're talking about just the possible configurations of matter and energy compatible with the laws. We have a moment in time when that configuration is spectacularly unlikely. And that's what determines all of these features. Right? So the question is, is there an explanation to that? Should we look for an explanation to that?
Real quick.
Maybe I should turn my light on because I'm getting in the dark here, right?
Yeah, you're good. He's going to pull up a question for you while you do that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Because I'm full.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
getting
go ahead,
dark.
Greg. Yeah, do what you got to do.
Okay.
Yeah. And this hat is digging into the back of my neck, and it's really annoying.
So the question is this guy declaring that deterministic interpretations of quantum mechanics is true? Isn't that a faith position?
Okay, but nothing that I talk about is these are not faith positions. These are all ideas that are grounded in the structures that emerge that are there in the theory. I don't know why people think that I'm trying to understand the things that are there, right? These are theories. They have mathematical expressions. I'm describing what we see there. And so when you ask me a question about quantum theory, I'm going to look at the mathematical structure. What do I find there when I look at the mathematical structure? I find ways in which to interpret certain things. There are various options there. And determinism is a perfectly viable option. Right? As I've said many times, the math that you'll see in a quantum textbook is perfectly deterministic. Right? There's a time parameter there, and things evolve in time in a very specific way. There's nothing that's uncertain about that. There's nothing probabilistic. It's perfectly determined. The solution, the wave function, is there. That's it. It's there for all times. Period. If you don't, then there are other. Then we have to make sense of experiments. But there are perfectly deterministic ways I don't know why this. You would say this is a faith position. It turns out that we look and we find that the explanations don't hold up, and determinism doesn't hold up, then we should conclude that determinism doesn't hold up. But these aren't faith positions, faith-based positions. These are ways of looking at what you have and trying to understand what you have.
So a quick follow-up to that. Aren't non-deterministic interpretations of quantum mechanics viable as well? Shouldn't we be agnostic as to which interpretation of quantum mechanics is true?
The problem is, I don't know what that means. So there are things that are unresolved. And so this is one of the questions that I'm still struggling with. I don't know what you mean when you say you have a non-deterministic interpretation of quantum mechanics. I want to know how to make predictions. And it seems to me that non-determinism is sort of equivalent to your explanation coming to an end and you not being able to address certain things.
Right.
So I don't really understand what that means.
I would also add that I don't think I've ever heard you make any kind of absolute claims about what is the case. These are all more tentative interpretations given the available evidence as to that you think is more reasonable.
Yes, right.
Yeah, I don't think you've never even said that the science gets us at like absolute truth, really. It's more like the models that we think work, given the tools we have, right?
No, absolutely. We know we're not at bedrock. Right. How do we know that? Well, our theories ultimately don't. They can't make sense of the world in certain aspects, and they don't gel together.
Right.
They fall apart. So we know that we don't have ultimate truth, and we don't know what most of these things are. We refer to them as emergent because we see them emerging, and we don't really know what to replace them with when we go deeper.
Right.
So, this again brings us back to one of the videos there where cause and effect gets completely scrambled in experiments.
Let's play the next video then.
Did you want to do the cause and effect one or the complexity one? I didn't know which one came next.
Whichever one you want.
Well, actually, real quick. Sure. Sorry, before we get... the most common Copenhagen wave function collapse interpretation of quantum mechanics is non-deterministic, while deterministic interpretation of quantum mechanics might be I don't know how to pronounce that, the Browley bomb pile wave interpretation.
Yeah, no, I agree, sure. So there are deterministic explanations where it's all perfectly laid out. The Broglie bomb is a little more involved, and some people don't like it because it has additional structure. It's not just a Schrodinger equation. We talked about this.
Yeah.
Again, the first part of that, sure, that's what people say. I don't know what it means to you talk about the Copenhagen interpretation. You have this state, and how you get from that to what you then observe, that part is missing. It seems to me that at least another way of thinking about this is that your theory is incomplete. And I don't really understand the difference between incompleteness in a theory and non-determinism. They seem to me to be kind of getting mixed up.
Right.
I need a way to differentiate between these things. When you say it's not deterministic, are you telling me that in this experiment, I don't know what you're telling me. Right? You're telling me that you don't know how to get the answer.
You're saying in virtue of claiming non-deterministic
right.
method there.
Right. The Copenhagen version. You have this superposition of states. Right? The particle is here and there, and in many other places at the same time, and then it ends up at one place. Now, what do you mean by a non-deterministic theory that tells you what happens.
Right.
What does that mean? So you'll do the experiment, you'll find that the particle ends up somewhere, and if you do the experiment 1,000 times, you know what that pattern is going to look like.
But you're not explaining anything there.
Right. But what does it mean to have an explanation that is non-deterministic? This isn't yet clear to me. So I don't know what people talk about when they say that kind of thing. But yes, in that space, that's where the non-determinists come in.
I mean, not just stay on this too long, but he says it would mean that probability is a real part of the universe, that nothing determines whether the photon goes through the filter or not. There is just a probability distribution.
Yeah, but is that an explanation to what you see? Right, so a non-deterministic explanation could be something like, so what happened in this case was this because of the randomness or something like that. And what happened in that experiment is the result of this. You have an explanation, and it's based in some sense on randomness, but you have an explanation. I don't know of any explanation that tells me what happened when I did an experiment and I got something. So the probability distribution, I know what I'm going to get if I do 1,000 experiments, but I want to know what happened physically when the system went from being in a superposition to being in one of those states of the superposition. What happened? Did something happen, or is this devoid of explanation? It seems to me that you're not saying anything when you're saying the probability distribution. You can get at the probability distribution. Sure, we can get that, but that's not an explanation to what happened in that one experiment.
Right, it's just kind of observing the brute fact that this is what we ended up with.
Right,
without actually addressing,
and you don't have any way of explaining that.
And also why the probability results in right. Okay.
Right. So by the way, this idea of this is a field. People trying to explain what happens from the superposition to the actual outcome. It's called the measurement problem.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. Was going to say, I mean, isn't it determined by the interference of the measurement? Like, wouldn't that be a part of the But that my ignorance on quantum mechanics is highly noted. So.
Right. So the idea is, if you then accept things like the coherence, then there's something going on there with the environment, and there's things that there's an interaction there that's where the further explanation is going to be.
Yeah, you couldn't. It seems to be that conflation which we talked about, which is like the act of observing as opposed to the actual, when you observe it with a macroscopic instrument, you're going to have some interference with the pattern of the atom or electron or whatever you're measuring, right?
Yeah, there's some further physical interaction there that needs to be taken into account, and that's going to be part of your explanation.
Mm-hmm. Want to get to the next video?
Sure.
Yeah, I have this one set up. I think it's the complexity one.
The universe as a whole evolves towards increasing entropy or disorder, a tendency physicists call the second law of thermodynamics. This movement towards disorganization might lead you to think that organized structures, like, say, living beings, would never spontaneously come into existence. Of course, entropy can go down in part of the universe. You can trade a decrease of entropy in one place, like cooling water so that it crystallizes into ice, for an equal or larger increase in entropy somewhere else, like heating the back of your fridge. Order increases here, but only at the cost of decreasing order there. But we can still ask, why do intricate, complex structures come into being in the universe if the overall tendency is toward increasing disorder? The secret is that order and complexity are very different ideas. Entropy measures how many different ways you can make an arrangement of small-scale particles that have the same large-scale properties, like 37 degrees Celsius, brown hair, good at soccer, and so on. There are lots of different ways. Complexity, on the other hand, is a measure of how hard it is to describe a set of large-scale properties. Simple systems are easy to describe. Complex systems require a lot more information. For example, take a cup filled with half coffee and half milk. It starts off in a state with relatively low entropy. You could swap coffee molecules with each other, or milk molecules with each other without changing things substantially. But if you swapped coffee molecules with milk molecules, that would be a noticeable change. It's also a simple setup: milk on top, coffee on the bottom. Now, as the milk and coffee begin to mix, entropy goes up. Where they are mixed together, swapping some coffee molecules for milk molecules no longer makes much of a difference. But the system also becomes more complex. To describe what you see, you would have to specify exactly how all of those tendrils of milk and coffee intricately swirl into each other. Continuing on, entropy keeps going up until the milk and coffee are completely mixed together, and swapping any molecules of coffee and milk with any others doesn't really make any difference at all. That's equilibrium, where there are huge numbers of arrangements of the molecules that look essentially the same. But this highly mixed equilibrium is once again simple. It's just a homogeneous mixture of coffee and milk, no more complicated fractal swirly stuff. This general principle is borne out time and time again. While entropy increases, complexity initially grows, then decays. Complexity can be a natural step along the path to increasing entropy. The best example is the universe itself. The early universe was very smooth and very dense. That's low entropy and also extremely simple. The far future will be smooth again, but very dilute. That's high entropy and again, extremely simple. It's now, in the medium entropy middle, that things look complex. Stars and galaxies, and veins of minerals and rock, and swirling clouds, and amino acids, and proteins, and human beings, and cats. We are at the exciting, beautiful stage of the coffee mixing. But just as with the coffee and the milk, in the far distant future, complexity will decrease again, and complicated stuff like us will at last be simplified out of existence.
Did you want to throw that up on the board there, Cease? I think I was reading. You're muted this time. I get to make fun of you.
Damn it.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever done it before.
What's up, J Mike? How does it feel to be a loser?
All right. I'm not going to spend that much time on this, but just for giggles. The universe is like a giant watch that was wound up and is now winding down. Unless the second law could be violated, that means the universe had a beginning, therefore a cause. And then for those that deny that the universe had a beginning, how do you go from high entropy state to a low one? And then
so
crazy.
Again, you don't want to talk about cause and effect. You don't want to talk about beginning because, again, the low entropy state doesn't necessarily need to be associated with beginning. They're two different things. You certainly want to explain that low entropy state, that moment in time, but it doesn't force beginning. And the fact that the person who asked the question thinks that it requires beginning ignores the fact that there are models in which second law of thermodynamics operates and t equals 0 isn't the beginning.
Right.
So that's just a fact. But again, we talked about cause and effect. We talked about the weirdness in time, and these are questions that again are written, are asked in terms. Again, they're grounded, they're anchored in these intuitive notions. And we just did all this work to try to argue that we shouldn't be doing that kind of thing.
Right. Yeah. I'll just follow up by saying to the person who wrote the comment, this is simply a misunderstanding of physics on your part. I would love to have you come on and maybe discuss your assumptions here with our guests sometime to maybe see that play out in real time.
I'd love that too, because soon enough, I'm going to have a montage of Cease saying, I would love for you to come on and have this conversation with multiple theists, and then I will not be able to montage the actual clip of them responding to the challenge. It'll just be to the next one where you say that. So
right.
Don't make me have to make that video. So, but anyway.
You should ask your guests to answer the following questions. See if they can test their intuitions about these strange ideas.
Yeah.
Right. So a glass is dropped, right? The classic example of the glass dropping and breaking and the fluid splattering all over the place. The glass hits the ground, given just the laws of nature, the laws of physics, not knowing anything about having a special low entropy state. Predict what the state prior to the glass hitting the floor is.
Right.
Does anybody want to make that prediction? Right. What's your intuition of the state prior of the glass before hitting the floor? That's an easy, right?
That the glass was falling. That you dropped the glass and the glass was
came
falling.
from your hand, right?
Right.
But if you're paying attention to the laws of physics and you don't have the special low entropy state, what does it tell you? It tells you that the cause of the glass hitting the floor is the glass splattered and broken all over the floor.
Right. So it's like a reverse.
Exactly.
The cause and effect are being reversed there.
Exactly. You just flip them in a universe in which you don't have this very special state. That's an extremely unlikely state because we live in a low entropy state.
Right.
That's the error of time. It's the same thing for all of these intuitive notions that we cling to. We cling to them because we live in this strange universe in which something very special happened at a certain moment in time.
What I find interesting is whether or not this is an issue of how we can understand the world, like if it's an issue of epistemology or ontology. The ontologically,
getting at the answers to these questions.
Yeah, if there is an issue with how we approach that, and this is why we end up like if there's something that we're missing from I guess from the equation in a sense.
What do you mean when you say it could be an issue of ontology? Meaning that there isn't an explanation?
No, meaning that really there is no difference. Like what you're describing, the observation that you just described, that you can reverse the cause and effect. If that's really how reality actually is,
this isn't an observation. This is a feature of the laws of nature.
Okay.
We don't observe these things, right? These come from noticing something in the laws of nature.
Right.
Right? We expect that the laws of nature seem to be getting at some degree of truth about the world. Right? So then we go to the laws of physics to get an answer as to why the past is very different from the future. And the laws by themselves say we don't have any such difference. We don't see this difference. And so the answer has to come from somewhere else. Again, it has to do with the way the universe is organized at some moment in time. That's not the laws of physics.
Right. Yeah, and
we have an explanation there.
And this idea that we need a cause for this low entropy state, and the move to sort of bring that into therefore God.
It's not causes that you want to talk about, right?
Right. It's just not understanding terms.
And effects are emergent properties.
Right. Yeah. So where do the laws of physics come from?
You could say, as we sort of agreed was a better premise for the cosmological argument, that the Big Bang has an explanation.
Right.
But that's also something that comes from an assumption. We don't really have the right to claim that.
It just seems to ask where the laws of physics come from is to continue to make the same mistake. So just not understand that cause and effect are emergent.
I'm not sure what cause and effect has to do with where the laws of physics come from.
I think it's being assumed that they would need to somehow be brought into existence.
Oh, that the laws themselves need to be caused.
Right.
Okay, now it looks like we're getting into a circular argument here.
Right.
Cause and effect emerge, they're not fundamental within the laws of physics. Now you want to bring cause and effect back as a fundamental thing to address the laws of physics themselves.
Right.
Again, this is the kind of thing that we do when we just refuse to learn to absorb the lesson. I think that we need to get beyond our common sense intuitions. Are you hearing me?
Yeah, I like how you tied that in the last part with bringing that to being fundamental there. While sidestepping that as the actual
right. The message is we continue as we look at some weird aspect of this, and we seem to have learned that common sense intuition is not the way to go, that those ideas are going to vanish in some weird way. And then when we try to have a conversation about them, we bring them back in immediately.
Yeah. That actually that perspective is
Because we just there's nothing else we can do. It seems my hope is that we will be able to get behind these things, but
Sure.
maybe we should go to the last video because that's really cool stuff.
Yeah, let's go to the last video.
We got the do cause and effect really exist one. Is that the one?
I think we did that one, right?
We did where does complexity?
Oh, sorry, yeah.
Yeah, and then we have the last witness and causal one, which we can bust through these pretty quick. Let's get the Chrome share audio. And we should be on the screen now.
The idea that certain things, events, or people can cause other things to happen plays a huge role in human life. We constantly desire to know why things happen in science, love, sports, philosophy, and so on. But because the underlying laws of physics don't care about the direction of time, cause and effect don't have the same meaning at a fundamental level. It's not that anything goes. The basic constituents of the universe, the particles and forces of modern physics, behave in predictable ways according to the laws of nature. In principle, you can just as easily know their past paths as their future ones. The current momentum and position of a particle determine its movement forward into the next second, but they also determine how it was moving in the previous second. Neither is really a cause preceding an effect. There's just a pattern that particles follow, kind of like how the integer after 42 is 43 and the integer before it is 41, but 42 doesn't cause 41 or 43. There's just a pattern traced out by those numbers. At a fundamental microscopic level, all we can say is that there are patterns between events. The macroscopic human-scale concepts of cause and effect only emerge when you have larger collections of particles like humans. As we know, time does have a direction for larger scale systems, and we can indeed talk about a spark causing oxygen and hydrogen to turn into water and an explosion. Spark plus oxygen plus hydrogen, and then water plus explosion is a sequence the universe follows, and it only happens in one direction. You never see a reverse explosion where water spontaneously splits into oxygen and hydrogen gas, and then at the very end emits a little spark. One way of thinking about causes is that the tiny spark has great leverage over the future. If you hadn't lit the spark, we wouldn't have seen a giant explosion. It doesn't work the other way. Removing or changing a tiny part of the giant explosion doesn't imply that there wasn't a preceding spark. When a small change to the present implies a big change to the future, the small thing we're changing is generally thought of as a cause. Leverage can also go the other way. Take this new pencil. The wood it's made of contains trace amounts of radioactive carbon-14 created by nuclear bomb testing. If the pencil didn't contain that carbon-14, that would imply that no nuclear bombs had been detonated in the last 80 years. While if you removed a pencil-sized amount of one of the atomic bombs, this pencil would still be basically the same. In this case, the fact that the pencil has lots of carbon-14 means that it has a lot of leverage over the past. Instead of calling the carbon-14 in the pencil a cause of the earlier detonation of hundreds of nuclear bombs, we call it a record of the bombs. In general, when a small change to the present would imply a big change to the past, the small thing we're changing is thought of as a record or a memory. So the distinctions between cause and effect, records and predictions, aren't fundamental to underlying physics. They only really make sense on the large scale because of the direction of time.
That is like
Hey, Henry here. Thanks for watching. This is the second video in a series
that. If you don't really track what he's saying there, watch that video 2 or 3 times. I think that is a very, very, very like in the
watch it
time that he put,
times.
It's insane how well put that is in the amount of time that he did that. So, but yeah, did you guys want to comment on that at all, or kind of move into the witnessing causal?
I just made a quick comment that if entropy increases, it reaches a very high state. It's at some point not only time. It's feasible to think of time as disappearing. It's also cause and effect that completely disappears. So it's not like cause and effect are just emergent. There's a point in which cause and effect don't even exist.
Mm-hmm. As opposed to someone thinking that they're fundamental in that.
Right. So the problem isn't that they are emergent properties, not fundamental. There's a point in which the configuration of matter and energy in the universe is such that these things don't even exist. Cease, you're muted.
Twice in one episode.
What's up, J Mike?
Yeah, so obviously it's a very counterintuitive notion, but I find it extremely interesting. I wanted to pose this question. Please ask him, does he think the arrow of time can move in an opposite direction than what we observe for anything with mass bearing in mind?
The arrow of time, once you have an arrow of time, you have an arrow of time.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that, if it's the other direction, I don't think there's anything fundamental there. But if you ask the laws of physics, what's the direction of time? They'll say, we don't know of any such thing.
Right.
So if I solve the equations, and I have time passing this way in the positive direction, it increases, I'll get the same description of nature, right? I described this on the other show. If you reverse that and you construct the equations again, you'll see that you'll get the exact same description of nature. The laws of physics don't know the difference. They don't have an arrow of time there. Right. And that's the puzzling thing. Why is that? If it's fundamental, that's where it begins.
And, this is why, I sometimes get a little bit frustrated with theists, because they'll state things like, science, is dependent on these intuitions for us to even do science, and it's just like this is not the case. It's not really talking with the experts in the field.
Well, intuition is certainly something that's used.
Well, no, of course, but I'm saying it's not. Our progress is not necessarily dependent on. I mean, sometimes it is, but the point I'm making is that this view of causality and this view of time, they're not things that I'm just making up. Like, they're well held in the sciences, and a lot of times theists don't seem to really be aware.
These things are always coming from somewhere. So when I say the laws of physics don't know the difference between, there's no arrow of time, or they don't know the difference between the past and the future, there's a specific statement there that I can write down in mathematical form and say, show me where the object is according to these laws at different moments in time. Now reverse that direction of time. Show me what the laws tell me as time gets smaller and smaller, more and more negative. You'll get the exact same description. They don't know the difference. There's something very specific there. It comes from somewhere. And all these things come from somewhere. I mean, there's a point at which, yes, you are interpreting, space, time, and matter to begin with, cause and effect. These things have a certain flexibility associated with their definitions, right? Mm-hmm. But that doesn't stop science from operating. Things are constrained despite that sort of looseness in concepts. You can't loosen it to the point where your brain falls out.
Sure. Was that the last video?
No, the last video is the one on mixing cause and effect. I mean, this is arguably the coolest thing of all. Well, maybe because I'm kind of used to these other ideas. I've seen them many times. So this one is just last few years. These people have been doing these experiments, which are just amazing.
Stop and share screen. This one now. Share audio.
Also, I love when theists don't recognize why it's wrong to kill babies outside of God saying it's wrong.
Yeah, that was
the fact that you need that to recognize the immorality of baby murder is concerning.
Maverick claims that you didn't answer his question. I thought you did a good job, but
that's everything I'm noticing.
Ask it again if you don't think I answered.
Well, so he's saying
you did say something about mass and the speed of light there. But...
Yeah, he's saying does he realize the arrow of time can be reversed if a particle travels above c? Technically, can anything travel above c if it has mass?
Can anything travel above c if it has a... Okay, so c is a limit, and if you decide to violate that limit, you can see in the math how you would violate even the emergent cause and effect relationships of things.
Right.
So you can also see in the math why it is that you can't travel to the speed of light, why objects of mass can't travel to the speed of light. It's their inertia increases. So there are a number of things there, but
All right, let's get into this one. Sorry, Maverick. We're trying. No one's deliberately avoiding questions. We're trying to answer them for you. Gotta say that all the music on it so far
It's been great, yeah.
According to quantum mechanics, when you send a photon through a half-silver glass, it is neither reflected nor transmitted. Both possibilities happen in a superposition. This is counterintuitive, so we want to prove that it is actually the case. For that, we interfere the paths. We bring them together again, passing through another half-silver glass. If the photon was in a definite path, having been either reflected or transmitted, it would again be either reflected or transmitted, being able to come out through either output. But this is not what happens. We can make the photon always come out through the same output, proving that was indeed in a superposition. We can put not only paths in superposition, but also polarization, angular momentum, energy, time. How about causal order? Can you also superpose it? First, what do we mean by causal order? If you think about two events in space-time, where Alice or Bob acts, you see that Alice is in the causal past of Bob if she can signal to him, and Bob is in the causal past of Alice if he can signal to her. We use this possibility of signaling as an operational definition of causal order. This way, we don't need to presuppose a fixed space-time and the fixed causal orders that it would entail. So, how can you put these causal orders in superposition? One way is to put Alice and Bob in an interferometer that has two paths in superposition. One that passes first through Alice and then through Bob, and another that passes first through Bob and then through Alice. And we can, as before, prove that the causal order was in fact in a superposition by using interference. We ask Alice and Bob to perform some operations on the photos they see, and then let the two paths interfere. There are some interference patterns that are impossible to mimic with a definite causal order. They are what we call a causal witness. Which interference patterns are these?
I think that's probably
If
enough.
Alice applies an operation A to the photon, and Bob.
So it's a little technical. In fact, I communicated with the author of this video and asked him if he had done one in the last few years. I think this is like 5 or 6 years old. But this stuff is just absolutely amazing. I mean, basically what it's saying is that not only can you look at the theories, look at general relativity and look at quantum mechanics and realize that quantum mechanics says you put things into superpositions, and general relativity says that time here runs slower than time there if your clock here is closer to a massive object like the Earth. And now you can create superpositions as a matter of principle from the theory where you have these differences in time, but that also implies that things happen more slowly when one place compared to another, and therefore that two things will happen in a different causal relationship. Okay, it's a little strange, but you can basically set up, A causes B and B causes A. The quantum theory says that both of those things can be in the same superposition, just like position, for example, was before. Now they're saying you can see from the theory that you can do this with cause and effect. Right? So you flip the cause and effect in the superposition, and now they're doing this in the laboratory. So they've done this in the laboratory. So basically, what they're saying is that when you look at nature, fundamentally, it's made of stuff where you are mixed to the extent that cause and effect are there. It's just superpositions of different causes and effects. And that in some average sense, the world that we're familiar with, it's our common sense, intuitive world where cause and effect are dominate, they're built out of a structure where that's kind of all over the place. I mean, it's mind-boggling. What do you make of this? Do we throw away logic at the fundamental level? Right? It's hard to know what to do here.
Well, I think that's the problem that I that I'm left with is that I'm not comfortable doing that, because at that point you welcome any kind of, I mean, to me it feels like you welcome the nonsense from the theists as well. If we don't have any rules,
then what are your options? What are your options? You have to look at quantum theory, look at the other options in quantum theory. Then you seem to be, maybe you're valuing a more convoluted theory. Right? It's not just the Schrödinger equation, it's some other stuff there that you're willing to bring in. Or you're willing to bring in an infinite number of different worlds. Right?
So again, some of these questions seem to continue to miss the argument provided here. Like, can a human pregnancy effect occur without intercourse?
Just responded that exact
same
thing.
So the amazing thing here is that if you look at the laws of physics, anything that's extremely counterintuitive to you, in fact, one of arguably the most counterintuitive thing is, birth precedes death. Right. So in what sense does death cause birth?
Right.
It's the same thing in all of the examples. It's difficult to see, but from the perspective of the laws of physics, that state is just a configuration of matter and energy. Right? And if you reverse all of those properties, you go from inanimate death to life.
So yeah,
You're not violating the laws of physics there.
So this is where I'm left, like I was saying, with frustration, because on one hand, yes, I think we're arriving at these strange notions through science and through applying those tools that we respect. But then it's like we arrive at these conclusions that seem to almost do away with those tools in a way.
Look, everything sort of gels, because our question is, why don't we see these extremely these extremely unlikely states? Why don't we see the movies of these absurd situations, played backwards? Glass break. Why don't we see the glasses occasionally, splattered glass, broken, shattered glasses with fluid come reassembling themselves? Why don't we see that? And we have an explanation for that. So it all gels together. That's what an explanation. That's the power of the explanation. There, it's not. There's nothing there substantiated, right? In that process.
Yeah, I don't know. I think there are, it feels like a philosophical wall that we hit, where it's like, how do we actually process what a lot of this stuff means?
There's our wall of a strong resistance to abandoning our common sense intuitive notions, because they served us so well.
But are you not concerned that that can give ammo to religious arguments in some way?
I'm concerned with. Sorry.
Oh no, I was just gonna say I don't see that ammo.
No, I don't see it either. But ultimately, I'm interested in the way things are. I'm not interested in trying to make life difficult for people who have certain ideas.
No, sure. But I guess when I talk to someone like, about the Trinity, for example, and I say something like the Trinity is incoherent logically, they might push back and say sort of the same thing about what we're suggesting.
But that's completely missing the point. You're talking about a world that we're familiar with, an emergent world, unless, of course, then you're talking about anchoring God in something that's non-emergent. But that's not the conversation that you're having there.
Yeah, I mean,
and also to posit the idea that the three people violating the law of identity are doing it currently now, if they're supposed to be existing. So any conversation about them doing that as an initial starting point before these concepts kind of makes sense to me. Seems like it still suffers the same problem within a present state of, I guess.
These statements are, cause and effect are emergent. It's a very precise kind of statement about where to find cause and effect and where you don't find it. I don't think you can just take that general idea and say, let's just throw away cause and effect and do whatever we want at any scale we want. That's not the message, right?
Are there any sources that you can tell us to examine to further look into these notions about causality? Are there any specific, or is this just where the field is at overall?
there are people who are studying, where are the people or the brains that have memories of the future, right? In this universe where we should have the laws of physics don't have this asymmetric feature, we should expect these kinds of entities. And it's a question some people are studying. I understand very little about this. It's just so beyond our intuitive notion that it's hard to follow the conversation. But somehow the world is selecting, given the low entropy state in which we're in, it selects away entities that have memories. I'm not sure if that's even the right word, of the future. Right? But I'm not sure if I answered your question. These are some other weird things that people are thinking about that should exist in a universe in which the laws don't have this asymmetry. But
as for, maybe you can send me some papers later on that we can link up.
People write about these things, or maybe more popular books that deal with these physical. I mean, Sean Carroll is.
Real quick, I'm just going to address this. They are denying cause and effect are necessary, which is strange because they have zero evidence for that.
I first want to attack the word necessary. You're saying not fundamental, correct? Would be the correct phrase.
Right.
Thank you. I should make sure we use the right words when we straw man.
I've said many times that cause and effect is in most of physics.
But to say that you have zero evidence for this is to just be ignoring what.
We're not getting our message across here. These things are coming from very specific places.
I mean, this is where the field is at. If you're saying that we have zero evidence for that, I would just say examine what's going on.
But ask the person who asked that question, what do you make of causal non-separability?
Right.
These are amazing experiments. We just showed you these experiments. Answer, what is that saying about reality?
Yeah, maybe Maverick, you can come on at some point as well.
I would love that. Yeah, that'd be great. Seems like there's a lot of things that we've been wanting to discuss with him anyway, so it'd be really good.
Set a time and we can continue the conversation.
Sure,
guys. I hope this was fun and
I loved it.
Yeah, it was a good episode.
Anytime we can provide something interesting and different and sort of challenge our assumptions, I think we're doing our job. So I always appreciate your time. And the episodes when you come on are probably my favorite, I have to say.
Yeah. Oh, hey, Wes in the house.
Do you have to head out?
Yeah, I kind of have to.
No worries. We're at 1 hour and 30, so we are all good.
Can you guys kick me out? I can't.
Sure.
I don't know. I'm stuck.
You're all good. I'll remove you from the thing. All you got to do is all you got to do is close out of your browser.
I'm just frozen here. I can't. My screen is big, and I can't.
Oh well, I'll have to end the broadcast probably. If you can close out, then that's the best way.
I can just close my computer then.
Yeah, you just close out, and it'll do it.
All right.
Thank you,
guys. Bye.
See you later. Talk to you later. Thanks.
Yeah. All right, guys. That will. He's stuck. I like Maverick. He's stuck there all night. Yeah, and so to everybody that responds in here, I think most people understand that regarding the arguments versus any personal kind of thing. We don't take any of those things personal, or hope you wouldn't either. But we do when we extend someone to come on the show. I want to state that it's not like put up or shut up. I mean, in a sense it is, but it's in a very civil way to say, hey,
to just have a conversation.
Yeah, let's have a conversation because we can get some progress done. And I hold my positions are very tentative in a lot of that aspect. So
sure.
The only conversations I don't like is when someone tries to use that aspect against you, where I admit at the beginning, like, hey, I might have a position here that I'm exploring or reading more into, and then somehow that's used against ammo. Like, we don't tolerate any of that type of philosophical discourse because that goes against a standard, in my opinion, of what it should be.
But my thing is
progress.
My thing is, like, a lot of the guys in the chat will say, like, we're providing evidence as we're going through each video, each stage. I mean, David is literally breaking down experiments that lead to these notions. He's not saying that, oh, therefore it's true. He's saying, this is explaining away these things we're observing. So if you're just coming in and saying there's no evidence for what we're saying, you just don't understand what's being said to you. And I understand that, like, it's difficult. These things are confusing. They're confusing for me. But just do put in the effort to sort of go back and rewatch what's being said, rewatch the videos, and then don't be afraid to come on and we can engage in conversation, and try to find that some common ground and hopefully some common understanding. Right. So. But yeah, that said, I appreciate anybody who comes in and gives feedback and watches what we're doing, whether you like it or hate it. It's good. It's good for us. So, and
agreed. Yeah. Well, so we'll conclude tonight. We got some few things coming up worth watching or worth noting. I'll put the debate here at some point this week or next week. I want to get priority for clips before the debate on there, since that already exists somewhere that if you really want it, I can give you the link for. So we'll try to get the clips out there to make it more digestible. The 11th, I'll have an episode airing on the nonprofits that we recorded, which will be really cool. Hopefully you guys tune in and enjoy that. Some good topics about PTSD and the lawsuit up against religious institutions about their abuse of using Title IX to discriminate against the LGBTQ community, which we'll also do a video at some point on about that, and why religious people use their religious dogma to excuse their horrific nature.
Did you just read that?
No, I didn't read any of that.
So I gotta put this on. You guys should invite only people that agree with you, so you can feel comfortable, because you say I will be invited, never am. First of all,
I think we've said it every episode you've come on, and down below, if you see that scrolling right there, that's scrolled on every episode ever that we've ever done, ever, it says, please give us a subscribe for more future content. Email axionsontrial@gmail.com if you want to be on the show.
Yeah.
That, Otangelo, observations are very, very vital to a successful.
Also, Otangelo, if you look at most of the videos on our channel, most of the episodes have been conversations with theists, with people who disagree with us.
Yeah, we literally have a conversation where both of us talk to a New Testament a guy who has a PhD in New Testament studies. We have conversations with Dr. I'm losing his name right now, Louis Marcos, Mr. Dr. Marcos. We put ourselves out there. We're trying to get more into having more theist guests on, but we took a little break to. You gave the email. You email us, because I can't copy and paste your email.
Yeah, we can't copy and paste the email from the StreamYard.
Just send me an email. It's right there. You're on your computer. We're hosting a show. You have the ability to do that right now. So just send us an email. We'd love it. Love it. You know what? I'll print screen this and save it so that if you don't do it, I can do it later.
Okay, cool.
All right. Anyway, guys, much love. Hopefully we'll have the Otangelo episode, which I am looking so forward to now. Like, I'm hyped. Like, woo, let's do it.
Oof.
Might do some.
Oh, that's great.
Might do some PEDs for that show. All right. No, I'm just kidding. All right. Anyway, guys, we love you.
Thanks again.
As I scramble to find the clip to get us out of here, be sure to subscribe, like, all that good stuff, and share with your friends if you think this is interesting. We appreciate it. Much love.
Thanks, guys.
I'm an American. And as an American, damn it, I love freedom. And I believe that you should be free to do whatever makes you happy and whatever you please to do, as long as you're not harming anyone. Now, there's a group of people here in America, or a few certain groups of people here in America, that don't feel the same way as me. They believe that homosexuals should not be allowed to pursue happiness and get married to one another if they so choose to do. Now, I have a question, because some of you may be in some of these groups. What is it about homosexuals getting married that is harmful to other people? Please leave your answers in the comments. I'm very curious. Thank you, TikTok. Have a wonderful evening.